So the single biggest theological project that Balthasar did in terms of a published project was his trilogy. Multiple volumes in each part, but it had three parts. The first part was the theological aesthetics. The second part was theological dramatics, theodrama. And then the third part is the theological logic. Now again, this is something that's stands out as a very strange way to do things. It's not a familiar ordering. In particular, so the theological aesthetics is looking at questions of beauty. The theodrama is looking at the action of God in relation to the world, seeing it in the categories of drama. It's like a play. And then the logic is where he turns to questions of truth and method. So it's a bit the reverse of the way most theologians would think of operating. You might think about first specifying how you know things, where the truth lies, what your method's going to be, and then you might think you would get to the central themes of systematic theology. And then if you're going to do anything about aesthetics, you might think it comes as an afterthought. Balthasar thought that this was one of the things that was wrong with modernity, that people did not pay enough attention to beauty, and that beauty needed to become at the beginning. Because if you weren't drawn to God, if you couldn't see the beauty of revelation, then you'd not be interested in its truth, or you'd not be interested in pursuing the good if you couldn't see the intrinsic beauty of goodness. So that beauty, he wants to say, is very fundamental. And so you can see the theological aesthetics as his equivalent, though, to a traditional starting point in fundamental theology. Fundamental theology is a discipline that you only get within Roman Catholicism, but it's sort of trying to explain why Christians believe in revelation. It's sort of general questions, not quite apologetics, but something like apologetics. Why believe it all? How does belief work? And so on. And Balthasar is saying, don't start with general proofs of the existence of God, and don't start with proofs of why we should accept revelation, or how we know that miracles make revelation credible, or anything like that, which had been traditional in Catholic theology. Start by getting people to see the beauty of revelation. That's your starting point. So it still is a starting point. How do we? It still is a way in 7 volumes for Balthasar to try to see the beauty of revelation. Balthasar uses the category of beauty quite freely, but if you try to pin him down on what he thinks beauty is, then one thing that's very central to his notion of beauty is the form, the gestalt, which is kind of like the overall shape of something. And he thinks that beauty has 2 parts. It has form and it has splendor, kind of shining out at you. And the 2 things are interlinked, or not interlinked. The form and the splendor are always met together. They're not really separable. So I think a central image in Balthasar's first part of his trilogy is that what happens in Revelation is analogous to what happens if you're standing before a beautiful work of art, that you're taken out of yourself, you're overcome by its beauty, and you see the whole of it, and you recognize it. You don't work your way up step by step to deduce at the end that's a beautiful work of art. It's just something that happens to you. And this notion of beauty, it's a very important one for Balthasar, I think, in getting beyond certain bad alternatives that theologians often face. That you might say, is revelation a set of truths outside of you that assent to? Then what you might say, is it just this objective thing out there? Then what intrinsic link does it have to me? This is a problem some theologians face. But if you say, well, actually, it's all a matter of my experience, then you might seem to undercut the objectivity and the reality of revelation. And Balthasar, I think, with his analogy of beauty, has a wonderful way between these 2 things. Because if you see a work of art and it's beautiful, it really is beautiful, let's suppose, unless we're going to be real relativists. It is beautiful, but it's I very much experience it as beautiful. I don't experience it by me sitting back and deciding about the nature of experience in general. It's a particular thing, it hits me. I've never seen it before, but I respond. So it's experiential, but at the same time it's out there and objective. So you can have a way of talking about revelation that makes it neither disconnected from life, nor the product of something we always already knew. So the danger with one of his, with Karl Rahner, let's say, who was working around the same time, people worried that with his emphasis on experience, there would be no room for the new in revelation. It was something we always already had, we always already knew. For Balthasar, revelation hits us, it sort of slams into us as something we experience, like a work of art does. but it can still be new, because this is the way art works. It's the newness that affects you. This emphasis that Balthasar has on beauty, and particularly on things having a form, and that you have to appreciate the whole of the form to appreciate beauty. So if you see the Mona Lisa, you don't appreciate its beauty by taking the nose first and analyzing that, and then looking at the ear, and then building up an argument. Nor do you appreciate the beauty of the Mona Lisa by, saying how exactly to the, what's the chemistry behind the pigments of this particular culture. You see the whole, and you either appreciate it or you miss it. Now, he thinks it's the same thing with revelation. It needs to be, you need to see the form. And so if you look at some kinds of historical criticism that have developed in the last few centuries, he thinks that these kinds of criticism can murder to dissect, to use. He doesn't use that cliche, but this is the cliche, that they're so concerned to work out, what lies behind the text, what might have been its origins, how can we handle it chronologically, how can we describe different pericopes and so on, that you're working on a cadaver in the end and you miss the whole. So without denying the possibility of doing historical criticism, Balthasar is a strong way of saying if you only do that of a certain kind, and of course he may be slightly caricaturing it sometimes, but if you only do that, then you miss revelation, and you would expect to miss revelation. So for Christians who might feel that their faith is in danger of being attacked and ripped apart by the discoveries of historical criticism, Balthasar gives some comfort. Of course, if you're going to pick apart a text, you won't see what's most important in it, and you need to see the whole. There's a lot of questions you can ask about Balthasar's introduction of beauty and aesthetics into theology. I mean, one question he asked is, how can we prevent this being a trivialization of theology, that you just play around with whatever you find most beautiful? And he thought that he could handle that problem by distinguishing between theological aesthetics and aesthetic theology, and saying that actually in theological aesthetics you don't apply a previously determined aesthetic theory or sensibility to revelation. You allow revelation to teach you about aesthetics. Here he sounds a bit like Karl Barth, and this is, I think, a point where he's influenced by Barth in different language. There are other questions that can be asked about his theological aesthetics. For instance, how good is his concept of what beauty is? He just plucks it out as though this is what everyone has always said about beauty. Is aesthetics actually all about beauty? There's lots of questions that can be asked and have been asked about this. What's been very important is that Balthasar somehow really opened wide the doors of theological work with his theological aesthetics, and suggested that maybe we can take literary texts, for instance, as a very serious theological source. So he's been a very positive influence on helping people to begin to think about new ways of doing theology, whether or not at every stage he did it successfully himself. The second part of Balthasar's great trilogy is his theodrama. So he makes a transition by saying that contemplation, wonder, which is what you're talking about in beauty, this is a part of Christian life, but it's not the whole of Christian life. There's also action. And so he moves on to action by using dramatic categories. Now again, this is a very unusual thing that he's done, to cast all of what you might call systematic theology, because he talks about Christology, anthropology, Mariology, the Trinity. He talks about all of that in the context of drama, theodrama. So what he does is take the language of the play and an extensive series of metaphors from play, from theatre, to structure and think through ways about talking about God in God's self and God's action in the world, and the place of our action. And the fact that there should be a place for our action is one of the central things that Balthasar is concerned with in the theodrama. And to understand this, you need to look again at the influence of Karl Barth on him. In very many ways, he follows Karl Barth. But when he wrote a book on Barth, something that he thought was a central problem in Barth was that Barth did not leave enough room and importance for our response to what God did. Everyone other than Christ seems to become completely marginal, at least as, it may not be fair to Barth, but at least as Balthasar reads Barth. So something like a Christological concentration was too much in Barth, and everything else gets wiped away. And Balthasar wants to say, we're in a drama, Christ is the main actor, but there are bit parts for us. We also have our role in the drama. So he uses the dramatic categories in part to find more room for our role after Christ, who still plays the central role.